I'm also grateful for the other board members of Notill, Texas. They've done a lot of work to put this event on. We're happy to have your attendance. We're happy to do these events. We believe in the future of this area. We believe in a brighter tomorrow with soil health. There are, as you've listened to all the different presentations, it's pretty clear that we're all a bit reductionist. And I think Tim Steffens put it best when he said that we needed a bigger box, but we still needed a box. It's pretty hard to get outside the box because we're human, and paradigms are useful. They're useful for us, and we're able to frame things in context, to study, to examine. But it has not been our intention through this event to say or indicate that we have got things figured out. Everybody that spoke knows that what we're doing today is not what we're going to be doing tomorrow. And so as you look through the presentations, as you think about what you've heard, keep in mind that we're not out here or up here to give prescriptions, but rather to share ideas and try to build on the knowledge of each other. The biggest reason that we started this is to try to develop peer groups and peer networks. The title for my presentation is Rotation, More Than Going in a Circle. And I actually got the idea for this from Roger Halldamy. Does anybody know Roger? How many of y'all know Roger Halldamy? Well, Roger was on an airplane and he was flying back into Lubbock. Can't remember where he was coming from, but there was a couple of guys sitting in front of him. And as they were flying in, they were looking out the window as they were coming into the Lubbock airport down there at the bottom. And one of the guys had made the comment. He said, you know, I've noticed that some farmers plant their rows north and south, and then other farmers east and west, and then some farmers are planting their fields in circles. And so the guy that was with him, he said, that's true. He said, I'm glad you noticed that. He said the deal is that a lot of farmers run the rows straight, but he said the newer and more progressive farmers, they plant their fields in a circle so they can rotate their crops. And so this is about 30 miles from there, and this is an aerial view of where we live. We're somewhere in the middle of that, and this is where our next story takes place. One of the things that we discussed as a board that we see happening in this area is a lot of people are really trying some new things and some different things. And one of the most prevalent things that people are trying now is the use of cover crops. But what we're noticing, and part of the reason this sticks out so much to us is because most of us went through this same journey. And so when we first started dabbling with covers in the early 2000s, what we were really trying to do is to avoid rotating crops. We wanted to plant cotton every year on every acre, but we didn't like the soil loss, we didn't like the moisture loss, we didn't like a lot of things, so we started tinkering with growing covers behind the cotton, and we didn't do that very long before we gave up on it. And so last year at the symposium, I showcased a neighbor and his production system. This year I'm going to do much the same thing, and I'm going to showcase another neighbor who is an outstanding farmer. He has a farm that he lives on, and he lives on this section, and on either side of it he has two other farms. And these farms were in CRP for a long time, and then he broke them out, put sprinklers on them, and started cropping them. He broke them out in 2014. And so this is kind of what it looks like. The interesting thing is the farm that he lives on, he doesn't own. And it has more production capacity, irrigation-wise, than what the other two farms have. And so even when he cut the other two farms in half, the two in the middle, and he rotates one with wheat and the other with barley. The production capacity on these farms is all around 2.9 to 3.2 gallons per acre per minute. And so this is all no-till. So every example, some of it might be strip-tilled, or at least have been some in the past. But by and large, all four of these tabs are no-till. The top one in continuous cotton, 2.88 gallons per minute. And keep in mind that after harvest, he's in there and he's sowing usually rye. And he grows that rye as a cover, terminates it, plants it back to cotton. The second one, and on a 5-year average, so in 2014, I said it's a 6-year story with 5 years of data. But the rest of the story is that in 2014, he got held out across all of it. And so it all starts, the story begins where it's all rotated behind sorghum. But we're going to look into these numbers a little deeper, but I just wanted to put it in perspective that his continuous cotton on a 5-year average is 1,230 pounds. The cotton wheat, 1856, the cotton barley, 1878, and then his dryland, which a lot of times he plants 2 and 1, which I've figured it to the field acre. He's got a 647 pound average, which is pretty strong. And his dryland rotation has been cotton and wheat for 20 years. And a little closer look at that dryland, you can see that those are really strong yields, and even this year, pretty good. 451 pounds is certainly pretty respectable for this year. His highest yield was in 2017. If you want to see a picture of that, he was kind enough to provide me with some pictures. That's 2 and 1 dryland cotton in 2017, 791 pounds to the acre. He also sent me a picture of his highest yielding, which was the cotton barley in 2018. Made 5 bales, which I've never actually grown 5-bale cotton, but I'm glad that he gave me this picture so I could show you what it looked like. I hope someday I have a picture of my own, but who knows? Maybe a while. But it's 40-inch solid planting. He also sent me a picture of him harvesting something between 3.5 and 4 bales. Now I promised that I would not, use his name. But he sent me this picture. And I really, as I put together the presentation, it's a picture of him on this cotton stripper. And I thought, well, you really can't see who it is. But I didn't realize how much more you'd be able to see with the bigger screen. And so as I show this, I'm not going to leave it up very long, but don't look too close. But this guy, this is my first effort at photoshopping, obviously. But this guy is a really good farmer. I mean, it's almost like he's magical. I don't know. But he had a lot of cotton harvest that year. He had a stripper baler, so he had to do pretty much all of it himself. And I was able to catch up with him after harvest. And I mean, he was pretty happy. He was out on his porch smoking a pipe and felt pretty good about things and how the year had gone for him. But back to the story. It's hard. Barry and Chris both did an excellent job in their presentations. And they talked about, how if you could increase your yields, and most of the time they were picking that 20% number or this or that you didn't have to double your yields to cut your acres in half. But if I told you that if you were looking at a continuous cotton system, and at 1,230 pounds on 3 gallon per minute water in a continuous cotton system, I mean, would everybody not agree that that's about as good as you can do? I would. I think that that's outstanding. And as I said, this Lucky's is an outstanding farmer. But if I told you that just the cotton wheat rotation, the cotton barley rotation would add 650 pounds to your 5-year average, I mean, that's almost unbelievable. It's unbelievable to me. which is why I chose this and why I drive past this pretty regularly. And so I was grateful for him sharing his APH data with me because it's really incredible. These are the years, and if you look at 2015, it's all behind sorghum. A lot of times it's a pretty rough go after something's been in CRP for a long term until it kind of melds back together and whatnot. But even in 2015, 2016, he had a tremendous crop behind his wheat, but he got held out on the barley. So that's the only year that's missing any data in this set. 2017, 2018 was the great big year, in 2019. But if you look at just the 4 years that we have a complete data set, and I averaged the cotton wheat and the cotton barley, the rotated ground out-yielded the continuous cotton by 659 pounds per acre. It was basically over a 50% yield increase. And, interestingly enough, that's not really 637 if you've got it all in there. And so as you look at that number, if you look at the continuous cotton, with the exception of 2016, which was an exceptional year, that's in a range of 150 pounds, a low of 1,073, a high of 1223, so like 150 pound range. And granted, it did really well in 2016, but the stuff that was rotated did even better and beat it by nearly 800 pounds. If you look at the economics on that, I didn't ask him what his inputs were or this or that. I went on the extension website, I downloaded the cotton budgets. I used the one that's for irrigated cotton in this area. It was based on $100 per acre cash lease. There's some other things, but those budgets are an incredibly useful tool. The only tinkering I did with those budgets is I took out some I added some to the harvest expense because the harvest expense was so much greater. But if you look at it on a 5-year average based on just the extension budget, on that 1,230 pound yield, he was netting $47.24 an acre. With that 50% yield increase, he netted $573. That's probably where that pot of gold came from. And it was over 1,200%, 12 times more net revenue on a 50% yield increase. And so if that doesn't really show that you don't have to double yields to make a big difference in net yields, I don't know what does. And I think this is a really valuable number because you may say, well, it's not apples to apples because this is on every acre and that other one's only on half the acres. But you've got to realize that he's taking so much less risk to generate that revenue and doing a lot less work by only growing half the acres in summer crop. But even if you factor it in on a whole farm basis, and even if you use extension budgets and you use an 18 bushel yield on the wheat, and you figure in $122 loss on the wheat acres, and you blend it together over every acre, it's still making 5 times more than the continuous cotton. And I think that this is just pretty incredible. So 2019, he thought it was too. And so with all this data, and with the last couple of years of out-yielding the continuous cotton by 800 pounds, he took this to his landlord, and they agreed that they would start a new direction. And he didn't take half of it, but he took a third of it out that he's now rotating on that section. This year was really hot and dry. It was a really tough year. But when he took that third out, he ended up with more water, 4.32 gallons per acre per minute instead of the 3.25 and the 2.91. And and he ended up with nearly twice the yield. He said that if he had left it at the 2.88, he didn't think that he would have made 500 pounds. He lost $73 an acre on that 1,073 pounds. Looking at these other numbers, 530 to 612, you know, and even figuring in the whole farm loss on the wheat, didn't lose that much more. Lost $89 across the whole thing on that, and then, you know, the 200 to 245. If all things were equal and he had been at the same irrigation capacity, and keep in mind that 1,073 pounds, you know, it probably had at least 50% more irrigation than what the rotated stuff had. But if he'd have made the 500 pounds, it would have made for a $400 an acre loss based on the extension budget as compared to these others. You know, if that, and this is not a conventional story. I mean, this is all, you know, what we consider no-till. But I don't believe that no-till is really possible without a rotation. I mean, we have to have a rotation. And we probably ought to be bringing in even more diversity than what we are. And hopefully we will over time. But what would you rather have? Would you rather have continuous cotton that makes 1,200 pounds, or would you rather have 4-bale plus cotton on half the acres? You know, the thing that I hear more than any other is that I just don't have enough acres. Well, if you can generate those kind of margins, how many acres do you need? You know, you'll need a whole lot more at that $40 than you will the 500 or 600. This leads us to our next phase. There's this idea that products are better than practices. I wish that were true. You know, we've talked about a lot of different things. We've talked about what we can do to improve our soil health. We've talked about technology. A lot of the speakers have made the statement that, you know, we don't believe that technology can fix every problem. And before I say anything else, I just want you to know that I use products. There's a lot of people out in the hall that have products, good products, you know, and there's nothing wrong with products, but you cannot buy soil health in a jug, by and large. There may be things that you can get in a jug that can help you improve the health of your soil. There's also things in jugs that can hurt you, but nothing can help you more than your practices. And there's not a practice that can help more than rotation. I've heard people refer to wheat as poverty grass. I think that's really funny. But that poverty grass over a 5-year blended average was looking pretty good. You know, and I love what Chris Ferret's doing. He's not going for any cost recovery on the wheat. You know, why is he not doing that? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking he's too lazy to get out there and cut that 18 bushel wheat. You know, it's not true. But you know, he doesn't have the expense of harvest. He's running a drill twice. But the big thing that he's doing is he's bringing more diversity in, and also he's really cutting down his chemical cost in that system. You know, he's at the point where, you know, as compared to fallowing wheat stubble chemically, you know, he's just not using a lot of herbicides. And so really at the end of the day, you know, he's probably, you know, further ahead of what this system would be. I believe he is. The difference is, it's that cultural obstacle. You know, this farmer spent 5 years convincing his landowner and his partner in that this was the right direction to go. And that takes time. And I think that it's an easier place to start rotating with wheat or a small grain for harvest than it is maybe jumping all the way to the covers. But those extension budgets are great tools to have those conversations. A lot of times these principles, you know, if we're not careful, we can use them like products. And that's why I'm trying to warn people against thinking of cover crops as products. They need to be practices. They need to be applied as principles, but they're not, an end-all be-all solution. And they will likely, if there's a way that it could keep you in continuous cotton, I have not found it. Most people, when they think about a soil health system, the most common question is, what is this going to cost me? What am I going to be out? Am I going to lose production? Is it going to cost more money? How do I overcome that? But these two things are not at odds. Economics is a social science that is concerned with the description and analysis of production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Interestingly enough, ecology is a branch of science concerned with interrelationships of organisms and their environments. These two things are very, very similar. Money is the metric by which efficiency is measured in terms of economics. When you think about the term, something's economical, that's always a positive term. There's only one exception that I've ever seen to that. I bought like this Lemon Law minivan on the internet. Got a great deal on it. Flew to California, drove it back, and when I showed up at home with that minivan, which was extremely economical, it was not considered or viewed positively by my wife. But it was still very economical. Overall, very positive. When conditions are economically positive, the result is wealth. By the same token, the metric used to measure the health of ecology, or the metric used is health. And when you think about things being ecological, that's also a positive term. And when things are balanced ecologically, just as wealth is generated in economics, health is generated or regenerated with a healthy ecology. These two things are not at odds. If things are not ecologically sustainable over a period of time, they won't be economically sustainable either. And if things aren't economically sustainable over a period of time, they can't be ecologically sustainable. The two things are intertwined and indispensable to one another. It's almost like, a husband and a wife. And I know that most wives probably feel like their husband could be more ecologically nurturing and this and that. Most husbands probably think that their wives could spend less money, But these two things, they just go together, And interestingly enough, they're derived from the same Greek root, either house or household. The word ecology wasn't even coined until 1866 by a German scientist. What did it cost my neighbor to practice better ecology? When you look at those numbers and those yield increases and consider that he didn't have any soil loss or erosion or on those days when there's a lot of dirt in the air, and then he still made another 650 pounds of cotton. I mean, it didn't cost him anything. He only had to gain, and that's really the point of the story. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here at the end, because I think it's really dangerous to judge people of the past by the standards of today. I've watched a lot of news in the last few years, way too much, actually. I think it's hard on my health. I'm trying to watch less. But I see a lot of this. I see people judging people of the past by the standards of today. And there's people pulling down statues. And, if people put up a statue a couple of 100 years ago, you've got to think that, the people who put that statue up probably thought enough of that person that they put a statue up. And I think we really need to be careful is how we judge people of the past. And the question that seems to be at the heart of everything is this one. Bet you didn't see that coming. But I asked myself this question, and I thought, before I even think about it, I better define the terms. And I thought that I knew what both of these terms meant. I thought really that they were interchangeable. Turns out, not so much. Bigotry, it's a noun, by the way, and it's an obstinate or intolerant devotion to one's own opinions and prejudices. So when you think about whether or not this nation was founded on bigotry, and you think about the true definition of bigotry, I think it's pretty clear that this nation's founding was actually the antithesis of that. It was even the opposite. I don't think that this nation and our founding was based on intolerance to other people's ideas and beliefs. Quite the opposite. Racism, obviously, is the belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. One of the things that I try to teach my children is that the neatest thing about being an American is it's not a race, it's an idea. What color is an American? Who can say? You can't. Because we're a very young nation. We have citizenry from all different backgrounds, all different colors, all over the globe. And it's not a race. I guess if you were in Europe, in some of those older places, if you were German, then that's not only a nationality, but it's also a lineage to a large degree. But it's not like that in America. I don't think that you could be a racist without being a bigot. But I do think that you can practice bigotry without being a racist. I think we see it all the time. There is so much intolerance that is born from this devotion to our own opinions. When I was younger, I went to Washington, D.C. and did an internship. And I was there for a semester, and I was a senior in college. And the thing that struck me the most about that experience was not the differences in people. I mean, people wore different clothes and did different things. But the thing that really struck me was the similarities in people. You had people that worked hard. You had people that didn't work that hard. You had, all of the spectrum of human nature was there. We were in a different place geographically, but it just seemed like no matter where you go in geography, human nature is pretty constant. And I guess that can be a good thing and a bad thing. But, it's really easy for me to sit on my couch at Petersburg and watch the news and look at what I really believe is the true expression of bigotry, in that intolerant devotion to one's own opinions and prejudices, and turn a blind eye to my own. We all get pretty comfortable in our own thoughts and our own opinions, and we're all pretty uncomfortable when those are challenged. And it's easy for me to cast a stone at these other people for what I'm calling bigotry, but it might do me more good to think about our own. Judging people that pass by the standards of today, this is one that hits a little closer to home. And it's something that I've heard many, many times. And people talk about, how much water that our grandfathers wasted. Has anybody ever heard that? Has anybody ever said that? My dad told me when he was a kid, we lived 5 miles from Petersburg, and he said he could have rowed to town in a canoe down any bar ditch in the county. There was a lot of water used. And by the standards of today, we look at that and we judge them pretty harshly sometimes. And we think that water was wasted. But let's think about this generation a little bit. You know, my granddad was born in 1908, and he went through the Great Depression. And that generation of people was the least wasteful generation in the last 100 years, easily. You might argue ever in our nation's history. That's arguable. And if he thought he'd been wasting that water, I can guarantee you one thing, he wouldn't have been doing it. That generation pulled nails out of old boards and straightened them, put them aside in a jar because they might need them again. You know, they were great examples of frugality in nearly everything, but they didn't put a value on that water. They saw it as a limitless, inexhaustible supply. And therein lies some of the problem when we start judging people of the past by the standards of the day. By the standards of their day, I would argue that they didn't waste that water. They certainly didn't see it as waste. And that water was used to build all these communities and all these towns that are out here that you see. It educated thousands and thousands of children. You know, it built pretty much everything in this area. And this is a two-way street. If they were here to see us today, if they were here to see how we live, how do you think they judge us? Do you think they think we were wasteful? You know, I spent quite a bit of time, I was fortunate, there's an Australian here. Anybody know that there's somebody here from Australia? We went to the Notill conference in Wichita, excuse me. And he came home and stayed with us for 4 days. And we spent that 4 days together, and we went all over the farm, and I asked him to hold nothing back, and he didn't. And we went around with a shovel, and we looked at everything, good, bad, and ugly. And you know, I saw a lot of things through his eyes that hadn't occurred to me. But one of the things that really stung, you know, as we traveled and spent that 10 days together total, is we're really pretty wasteful as Americans, myself included. I mean, we are not the examples of frugality that our grandparents were. And we need to be. And this is why. You know, there's been a lot of talk today about climate change and otherwise. You know, I believe that the way that we use land influences weather and climate. And I don't think that you can really argue that if you look through history. This doesn't look so good. But you've got to realize that, you know, and it was Tim Steffens, I believe, that talked about the Roman Empire and how they controlled kind of this whole area. And, you know, their land stewardship was not very good. But if you think about how this happened, fossil fuels had nothing to do with it. This was all, or a lot of this was agriculture. If you read in the Bible, you can read about these places. I mean, there's the Promised Land. That was a land flowing with milk and honey. When Solomon built his temple, he imported the cedar from Lebanon. A lot of cedar left in Lebanon today. You look at Syria and some of those massive temples. Can you imagine the kind of wealth that it took to build those temples? That now the foundations are 4 or 5 foot out of the ground. There's no topsoil left. And it wasn't the burning fossil fuels that did this. It was agriculture. And I think that's pretty amazing. You know, this little green spot right here, that was the most resilient agricultural ecosystem on the face of the planet. And it survived under continuous irrigation for thousands of years Towards the end of the Roman Empire, at the height, the population of Rome was like 1 million people. And when they couldn't feed themselves, they annexed Egypt, mainly for this, because that's where they were getting a lot of their food. A lot of it they were importing from Syria. That's how Syria got so wealthy. You know, built all that infrastructure. And also how they lost their souls and their land. This is not the most resilient agricultural ecosystem on the planet anymore. And I think that that probably started in the 1800s with their continuous year-round cropping, and probably culminated with the building of the Aswan Dam in the 60s. But it's going to be really interesting to see how that land changes over the next few years, because there's not another place on the globe that's like that. But really, this is not what haunts me. What really haunts me is wondering what this is going to look like. And I saw Dr. Zach's slides, and I thought it was really sobering to think about how that line of drier, that 100 meridian is creeping. And we've talked about not judging the people of the past by the standards of today. I just wonder how the people of the future are going to look back at us. Because this here is pretty important to each of us. And I think that's why we're here. And we can do so much as a community. More than you could possibly imagine. I'm not so sure I like the way this looks. And it matters. You know, I spilt barbecue sauce on my shirt. And I didn't mean to. And I hope it comes out. But then I realized it's not that big a deal because it's actually Tucker's shirt. And I wanted to be sure and wear one that I'd never worn before. And so I just went in his closet and got it. You know, which is handy. I'm going to hate it when he goes to college. You know, I'll have to stash some of his clothes behind, you know. But nothing means more to us than family. And we need to do the best that we can to be the best stewards of this land that we can possibly be. You know, it's easy to get lost in the science of all this. It's easy to fight and complain. Well, you know, this may happen or it may not happen or this or that. But to me, it's more of a question of stewardship. And the earth is a great blessing to each and every one of us. And we need to do all that we can to be the best stewards of this land that we can be. You know, this last year and the last planting season that we went through may have been one of the hardest planting season that I've ever been through in my life. We didn't unhook from that planter until the 13th of July. Actually, I left it hooked up, but didn't get off of the planter. And we had so much rain, and with all that rain, we're thinking, you know, we've got to get a crop started. We've got to take advantage of this situation. And as the storms kept coming, and we replanted things 2 times, a lot of people replanted things 3 times. It was just really, really hard, and it really, really wore on us. Anybody else feel that way? I see a lot of heads nodding. But it occurred to me that the harsh reality is that even when we're trying to take the best care of the land that we can, we've got to remember that we don't live in a garden anymore. And we haven't for a long, long time. And this is not a perfect world. I believe it's a fallen world. But the one thing that I think is the most important to take out of this is that we owe our very existence to the ground, to the soil. It's where we come from. It's where we go back to. And it's been this way for a really long time. But it's that in-between time that really matters. And it matters to us, and it matters to all the people that will ever come after us. Thank you.